Poor black maid accidentally hugs Mafia boss at airport. He looks at her and says, "Now you're mine." Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. It was a busy morning at the airport, and as the crowd surged toward their gates, Sarah tried to navigate through the bustling terminal, her eyes downcast, hoping to blend in. She had a long day ahead, cleaning the hotel rooms, making sure everything was in order, then rushing back to her tiny apartment in the city. She was used to being invisible, used to being treated as just another face in the crowd. She didn't mind it most days. But today was different. Today, she had made a mistake. As she was rushing to pass through the crowd, trying to avoid getting bumped into, she found herself colliding with someone. She looked up, startled, and froze. There he was, the Mafia boss, Dominic Castellano, the man known for his control over everything in New York, a man whose reputation alone made even the bravest men tremble. His icy blue eyes locked with hers for a brief moment, but in that instant, something strange happened. He didn't look at her with the usual disdain most wealthy people directed at her. Instead, his gaze lingered, calculating, as if he saw something more in her than just a poor maid. And before Sarah could apologize and step back, it happened. He pulled her into a hug. At first, she didn't know what to do. His embrace was firm, but there was no malice in it, just an overwhelming sense of power radiating from him. She stood there, stiff, not sure if she should pull away or stay still. The moment seemed to stretch on forever. When he finally pulled back, his eyes never leaving hers, he said something that sent a chill down her spine. "Now you're mine." Sarah's heart raced. She didn't understand. She was just a maid, just a nobody. Why was he speaking to her like that? But before she could process the words, he turned and walked away, his bodyguards following in tow. She stood there for a moment, frozen in place, her mind spinning. Was it a mistake? Was he serious? She couldn't shake the feeling that her life had just changed in that one brief encounter. She couldn't help but wonder what he had meant. What did he want with her? She hadn't done anything special, hadn't even looked at him the way others might have, with desire or admiration. She was just doing her job, trying to get through another day in a world that rarely noticed people like her. But the words echoed in her mind, and she couldn't ignore the curiosity that had begun to grow in her. What would happen next? I had no idea how much my life was about to change in that one moment. As I stood there, my mind racing from Dominic Castellano's words, "Now you're mine," I could hardly process what had just happened. I was just a maid, nothing more than a cleaning woman trying to make ends meet. I didn't belong in his world, yet somehow, he had pulled me into it. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I tried to push the incident to the back of my mind as I continued my work. Cleaning rooms, fixing beds, washing dishes, and trying to keep up with the demands of my boss. All while my mind kept drifting back to Dominic and his icy blue eyes. I hadn't seen him again after that moment at the airport, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was happening, something I wasn't prepared for. The next few days went by, and I tried my best to go on with my usual routine. But then, out of nowhere, the call came. "Sarah, you need to meet with Mr. Castellano," my boss said over the phone, his voice filled with that nervous energy I knew all too well. "He's requested you specifically." My stomach dropped. Mr. Castellano? Why? What did he want with me? I stood frozen for a moment, unsure of what to do. Was this some sort of joke? A mistake? But it was happening, and I had no choice but to obey. I changed into my best uniform, the one that was just a little too tight and a little too old, and I tried to calm the racing thoughts in my head. When I arrived at the office building where he was staying, I was escorted through the back entrance by a bodyguard. It all felt surreal, like I was walking through a dream. The building was sleek and modern, with dark glass windows that reflected the sunlight like mirrors. Inside, everything was pristine and polished, from the marble floors to the crystal chandeliers hanging above. I was led into a private office at the top of the building, where Dominic was sitting behind a large desk, looking every bit the powerful man I had seen at the airport. He looked up as I entered, and for a split second, I felt like I was standing in the presence of a king. His eyes were still as intense as ever, But there was something different about him today. Something softer. Almost like he was trying to figure me out. "Sit," he said, his voice smooth and commanding, though not as cold as I had expected. I hesitated for a moment, then slowly took the seat across from him. The silence between us was heavy, and I could feel the tension in the air. I didn't know what to say or how to act. "I don't bite," he said, breaking the silence with a hint of amusement in his voice. "You're safe here, Sarah. Just relax." I nodded, though my heart was still pounding in my chest. "I'm sure you're wondering why I called you here," he continued, leaning forward slightly, his fingers tapping lightly on the desk. "And to be honest, I'm wondering the same thing. There's something about you, something I can't quite place. You're different from the others. You've caught my attention." I swallowed hard, trying to process his words. "I don't understand," I said quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'm just a maid." He tilted his head, studying me for a moment. "No, you're not just a maid. You're someone who's capable of more than you know." His words sent a strange shiver down my spine. What did he mean by that? And why was he looking at me like I was something more? The more he spoke, the more confused I became. But there was one thing I couldn't ignore, the undeniable pull between us. It was like he saw something in me that no one else did, something beyond my appearance or my status. I had to admit, there was a part of me that was intrigued by him, even though I knew I should be terrified. But before I could say anything else, he stood up, walking around the desk and coming closer to me. "You'll see," he said, his voice low and intense. "Things are going to change, Sarah, and I'm going to make sure you're a part of it." I didn't know what that meant, but I had a feeling I was about to find out. I still couldn't believe what had happened. Just a few days ago, I was a maid, invisible to the world, my life a routine of hard work and loneliness. Now, I was sitting in a sleek office, staring at the very man whose name made even the most powerful people in New York nervous. Dominic Castellano was still watching me, his gaze intense and unwavering. There was a sense of power in his presence, something that made me feel small yet strangely protected at the same time. His words from earlier echoed in my mind. "You're not just a maid. You're someone who's capable of more than you know." I didn't understand what he meant, but I could feel the weight of his attention on me. It was unsettling, and yet, strangely, it was all I could think about. "You're different," he repeated, leaning back in his chair. "I don't know why, but you are." I looked up at him, meeting his gaze. "I don't understand, Mr. Castellano. I'm just doing my job." He smiled, but it wasn't the kind of smile I was used to seeing from people in his position. It wasn't condescending or dismissive. It was curious. "You keep saying that," he said softly, his voice thoughtful. "But I think you're doing much more than just your job." The room seemed to grow smaller around me. My heart raced in my chest. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "I mean," he said, standing up and walking around his desk, "that I see something in you. Something you might not even see in yourself yet. You've got more strength, more fire, than you realize." I didn't know how to respond. No one had ever spoken to me like this before. I wasn't used to being seen, let alone praised. "You don't belong in that world," Dominic continued, his voice low and steady. "You've been stuck in a cycle, working hard just to survive. But you could have more. You could be more." I didn't know what to say. Was he trying to recruit me into something? Was this some sort of test? "I know what you're thinking," he said, as if reading my mind. "You're wondering if I'm trying to manipulate you, if this is all some game to me. But it's not. I'm offering you something real, something that could change everything for you. I'm offering you a chance to be a part of something greater." His words hung in the air, heavy and charged with promise. I felt a knot form in my stomach. I had always known that I wanted more from life than just scraping by, but this was different. This was a world I didn't know how to navigate. "What are you asking me to do?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. Dominic paused, and for a moment, I saw something in his eyes, something that made me feel both nervous and excited. "I'm asking you to step into my world," he said, his tone serious. "I'm asking you to trust me. I'm asking you to see what you're truly capable of." I didn't know what to say. My heart was racing, and my thoughts were a blur. But I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't go back to the life I had before. I had always dreamed of something more, something bigger. And now, for the first time in my life, it seemed like I had the chance to grab it. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice steady but uncertain. Dominic smiled, and this time, It was a smile that sent a shiver down my spine. I want you to be by my side, he said simply. I want you to work with me. I want to show you what's possible when you stop hiding and start living. The room felt charged with energy, and I could feel the pull between us, a force that was impossible to ignore. I had no idea what this would mean for me, or what would come of it, but I knew that I had just stepped into a new chapter of my life, a chapter one couldn't turn back from. I don't know what you see in me, I said quietly, my voice almost lost in the vastness of the room. But I'm willing to try. Dominic's expression softened, and he nodded. That's all I ask. Trust me, and I'll show you how far you can go. And with that, something inside me shifted. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain. I was no longer just a maid. I was someone worth noticing. And with Dominic Castellano, I might just have the chance to finally live the life I'd always dreamed of. I left Dominic's office that day with more questions than answers. The words he had spoken to me, promising me something beyond what I could ever have imagined, echoed in my mind. He saw something in me. He wanted me by his side. The weight of his words, the intensity in his eyes, left me both terrified and intrigued. For the first time, I wasn't just a maid. I was someone he cared enough to notice. But what did that really mean? I spent the next few days trying to make sense of it all. I kept going to work, cleaning rooms, dealing with the constant demands of the hotel guests, but in the back of my mind, I kept thinking about Dominic. He had changed everything. He had opened a door to a world I never thought I would be a part of. And now, I had to decide whether I was willing to walk through it. On the fourth day after our meeting, I received another call from Dominic's office. He wants to see you again, his assistant told me, her voice cool and professional. Come to his penthouse tonight at 8. I barely had time to process the request before I found myself standing in front of a building that felt like a fortress. The penthouse was in one of the most luxurious towers in the city. The doorman opened the door for me with a nod, and I stepped inside. The building's marble floors gleamed, and everything from the furniture to the lighting screamed wealth and power. I was led to the elevator and, as it ascended, I couldn't help but feel a mix of nerves and excitement. When the doors opened, I was greeted by one of Dominic's bodyguards, who led me into a grand hallway. The walls were adorned with expensive art, and the air smelled faintly of cologne and fresh flowers. As we approached the large double doors at the end of the hall, I could feel my heart racing. I was nervous, but also curious. What did he want from me now? I walked into the room, and there he was, Dominic. He stood by the window, looking out over the city, his figure tall and imposing. He turned when he heard me enter, a small smile playing at the corner of his lips. You came, he said simply, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. Of course I came, I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. What do you want from me? Dominic motioned to the chair in front of him, gesturing for me to sit. I told you before, he said, his tone softer now. I see something in you. I want to help you see it too. I want to give you an opportunity, Sarah. I sat down, my mind spinning. What kind of opportunity? I asked, trying to hold my ground. You don't have to be stuck in that life anymore. You don't have to clean rooms and serve people who barely acknowledge you. You have potential, and I can help you reach it. His words hit me harder than I expected. It was everything I had ever wanted, a way out of the endless cycle of poverty, a chance to do something more with my life. But at the same time, I couldn't help but wonder if there was a price. And what do you expect in return? I asked cautiously. Dominic's smile grew a little wider, though his eyes remained serious. All I ask for is loyalty, he said, his voice low and commanding. Loyalty to me, to the opportunity I'm giving you. I felt a chill run through me. Loyalty. What did that really mean? Was I willing to give up my freedom for this chance? Was I willing to trust him enough to step into a world I knew nothing about? I can offer you more than just a paycheck, Dominic continued, his voice gentle yet firm. I can offer you a life where you're valued, where you're not invisible anymore. I stared at him, my heart pounding in my chest. The words he spoke were everything I had ever dreamed of. But the fear was still there. Could I trust him? Could I trust myself? What happens if I say no? I asked quietly, almost afraid of the answer. Dominic's expression softened, and for the first time, he looked less like the powerful mafia boss everyone feared, and more like a man offering something real. If you say no, he replied, then nothing changes. You go back to the life you had before. But if you say yes, everything changes. I'll be here, and I'll make sure you're never invisible again. His words hung in the air, and I knew that my decision, whatever it was, would shape the rest of my life. But one thing was clear: I could never go back to being invisible again. I stood there, frozen in the luxury of Dominic Castellano's penthouse, his words hanging heavy in the air. I had the chance to leave everything behind. The small apartment, the endless cycle of cleaning rooms for wealthy strangers who barely looked my way, the exhausting life that had left me invisible for so long. He was offering me more than I ever imagined. A life where I wouldn't have to hide in the shadows anymore. But there was still a lingering fear. Could I trust him? Could I trust myself? Dominic watched me, his gaze steady, waiting for an answer. I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on me. If I said yes, my life would change forever. And if I said no, I would go back to being just another maid. But I couldn't ignore the pull of his words, the possibility of something more. "I'll do it," I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. The decision came so suddenly, yet it felt right. His smile widened, and he nodded, as if he knew exactly what I needed to hear. "Good," he said, his voice smooth but firm. "I knew you would." Over the next few weeks, my life shifted in ways I hadn't anticipated. I left my old job at the hotel, packed up my things, and moved into a small but luxurious apartment provided by Dominic. It wasn't much, but it was a start. A fresh start. Dominic wasn't just offering me a place to live, though. He was teaching me things I never thought I could learn. He introduced me to the world of high society, a world that had once felt so out of reach. Dinners at expensive restaurants, meetings with powerful people, and the constant presence of security were now a part of my everyday life. I was no longer just Sarah, the maid. I was Sarah, someone with potential, someone who belonged. But as much as things changed, there were moments when I still felt like the same person. When I walked into a room full of influential people, I could still feel the weight of my past holding me back. I wasn't sure if I truly belonged in their world. But Dominic was always there, a steady presence, guiding me. "You belong here," he would say, his voice reassuring. "You're not just some maid. You're someone who can make a difference." And in those moments, I would believe him. But as time went on, I began to see another side of Dominic, a side that I hadn't expected. I had known about his reputation. He was the Mafia boss, the man who controlled everything. But I didn't know the toll it took on him. One night, after a long day of meetings and dinner parties, I found him sitting alone in his office, looking out over the city. His face was unreadable, his posture rigid. "Is everything okay?" I asked, stepping into the room. He turned to me, his eyes softening for a moment before he sighed. "It's just the pressure," he said, his voice heavy. "It never ends. There's always someone trying to take what's mine." I walked over to him, unsure of what to say, but I felt a sudden urge to reach out. Without thinking, I placed my hand on his shoulder. The contact was simple, but it seemed to break something in him. He looked at me, his eyes searching mine, and for a moment, the powerful Mafia boss was gone. He was just a man, burdened by his own fears and insecurities. "You don't have to carry it all alone," I whispered. He smiled, a rare, genuine smile that made my heart skip a beat. "I know," he said softly, "but sometimes it's hard to remember that." That was the moment I realized that there was more to Dominic than just the Mafia boss everyone feared. He wasn't just the man who ran the city. He was a person, with fears and dreams, just like anyone else. And in that moment, I made a decision. I wasn't just here for the luxury or the chance to escape my old life. I was here because I wanted to help him, too. I wanted to be more than just a part of his world. I wanted to be someone who could stand by his side, not just as his employee, but as something more. And as I looked at him, sitting there with the weight of the world on his shoulders, I knew that my decision to be with him was about more than just a job. It was about building something real, something that could change both of our lives. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, I was excited to find out. I had barely settled into this new life when the weight of Dominic's world began to settle on my shoulders. It was one thing to be a part of it, but another to understand what that really meant. At first, it felt like a dream. The luxury, the status, the people who suddenly seemed to recognize me. But the more time I spent with Dominic, the more I realized that the world he operated in was far from glamorous. It was ruthless, dangerous, and complicated. I started to see the cracks in his perfectly composed exterior. Behind those ice blue eyes, There was a constant battle, a battle that, until now, I hadn't fully understood. One evening, Dominic invited me to a meeting at one of his private properties, a place he had made clear I was to never visit alone. I had seen the mansion from the outside, its towering structure and dark windows looming over the city like a fortress, but I hadn't seen the inside. As I walked through the heavy iron gates, my heart began to race. This was where the real decisions were made, the ones that controlled the fate of empires. The security was tight, and the air felt different here, thick with tension. As I entered, I was immediately struck by the sharp contrast between the cold, hard stone floors and the plush velvet furniture. It was a room designed for power, not comfort. Dominic was already there, sitting at a large mahogany table, surrounded by a few men I didn't recognize. They were all talking in hushed tones, their faces serious, their eyes never meeting mine. As I approached, they all stood, and for a moment, I felt like I had stepped into a world where I didn't belong. Dominic's eyes locked onto mine, and he gave me a subtle nod, signaling for me to sit beside him. I did as he asked, but my nerves were on edge. I had never seen him in this light, so commanding, so in control. The man I had gotten to know was still here, but there was something darker underneath, something that made me feel like an outsider in his world. As the meeting went on, I began to understand the weight of his role. These weren't just casual business dealings. These were life and death decisions, involving people whose loyalty could be bought or broken with a single word. The tension in the room was palpable as Dominic discussed the plans for expanding his territory. There was no room for doubt, no hesitation in his voice. He spoke like a king who knew his subjects would obey without question. I sat silently, absorbing everything, trying to make sense of it all. But then, as the meeting concluded, something happened that I didn't expect. One of the men, a younger associate, spoke out of turn. "Are you sure this is the right move, Mr. Castellano? It could jeopardize everything." Dominic's expression didn't change, but the air seemed to freeze. For a moment, it felt like time had stopped. I had never seen him look so cold, so distant. "You doubt me?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. The room grew silent. The man immediately apologized, his face pale, but Dominic didn't seem to care. Without saying another word, he dismissed the meeting and turned to me. "Let's go," he said, his tone softer now, though there was still an edge to it. As we walked through the mansion's long corridors, I couldn't help but feel the weight of what had just happened. Dominic was a man of power, but power came at a cost. I didn't know if I was ready for this world, for everything that came with it. But as I glanced over at him, I realized that he wasn't just offering me a life of luxury. He was offering me a life of responsibility, a life that would come with its own challenges. The door to the balcony opened, and the cold night air hit me. Dominic stepped outside, his silhouette framed by the city lights. I followed him, standing beside him, not knowing what to say. He looked out over the city, and for a moment, the man who controlled everything seemed lost in thought. "You're still here," he said quietly, his voice softer than I had ever heard it. "You're still standing beside me, even after all of this." I wasn't sure how to respond. I had thought about walking away more than once, but something in me told me to stay. "You don't have to do this alone," I said, my voice trembling slightly. He turned to look at me, his expression unreadable. "That's what you don't understand," he replied. "I don't get to choose. I never have." It was then that I realized Dominic was trapped in his own empire. He had built it, but now it controlled him, just as much as he controlled it. And I was standing at the edge of it, unsure of whether I could handle the weight of the life he was offering me. The wind picked up, and I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to shake off the chill. "I'm not going anywhere," I said, my voice firm. "I'm here for you, and I will be." He didn't say anything, but the look in his eyes was enough. In that moment, I knew that no matter how hard this would be, I couldn't leave him now. We were in this together, whether I was ready for it or not. I had barely settled into the rhythm of my new life when things began to spiral faster than I could comprehend. Dominic had made his offer, and I had accepted, not fully grasping what that would mean for me. The promises he'd made were tempting, a life of luxury, of purpose, of recognition. But there was something that gnawed at me, something I couldn't ignore. The power that surrounded Dominic wasn't just about wealth. It was about control. And that control wasn't just over his business dealings. It extended to everything in his life, including me. The days began to blur together as I adjusted to this new world. The mansion, the meetings, the security, it was all overwhelming, but it was also exhilarating. I no longer had to clean rooms for strangers. I was part of a world where I had value, where I mattered. But there were times when I saw the cracks in the facade, when I saw the toll that this life took on Dominic. One evening, after a particularly intense business meeting, we found ourselves alone in his office. I could tell something was different in his demeanor. He wasn't the confident, powerful man I had grown accustomed to. He looked weary. "You seem distant tonight," I said softly, stepping closer to him. He didn't look up immediately, but when he did, his eyes were darker, more tired. "It's just the pressure," he said, his voice almost a whisper. "There are always people looking to take what you've built. Always someone trying to take it all away." I understood the sentiment. I had always felt like I was one mistake away from losing everything. But I couldn't help but feel that there was more to it than just business. I moved closer, standing beside him. "You don't have to carry all of this by yourself," I said gently. "I'm here. You don't have to face it alone." Dominic studied me for a long moment, and for the first time since I'd met him, I saw something other than the Mafia boss in his eyes. I saw vulnerability. It was fleeting, but it was there. He sighed, looking out the window. "I've been doing this for so long. I've forgotten what it feels like to trust anyone," he said, almost to himself. "I don't know if I can let anyone in." The words hit me harder than I expected. Dominic had built this empire, this fortress around him, and I realized that no matter how much power he wielded, he was still a man, one who feared being vulnerable. I reached out, placing my hand on his arm. "You don't have to be alone," I repeated, my voice firm. He looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in a way that wasn't about business or authority. For a moment, he seemed to soften, as if the walls around him were crumbling just a little. He didn't pull away, but he didn't respond either. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, his eyes closed, as if he were lost in thought. The silence between us was heavy, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was intimate, in a way I didn't expect. "I never wanted this life," he said quietly, almost like a confession. "I was born into it, but it's not what I would have chosen for myself." I didn't know what to say. His words surprised me, but they also made me realize something I hadn't fully understood before. Dominic wasn't just a powerful man. He was a man who had sacrificed parts of himself for the sake of his empire. "You've had no choice, have you?" I asked, my voice soft. He opened his eyes and met my gaze. "No choice," he echoed, his voice thick with something I couldn't quite place. "But now I have people depending on me. People who need me to stay in control, to keep this world from falling apart." I could see the weight of those words in his eyes. The weight of responsibility, of obligation, of being the person everyone turned to when things went wrong. It was a burden, and I could feel the toll it took on him. "You don't have to do it all alone," I said again, though this time, it felt different. I wasn't just saying it to offer comfort. I meant it. I could see the cracks in his armor, the way he longed for something more than power. And for the first time, I realized that maybe I wasn't just here to be by his side in his empire. Maybe I was here to help him carry the weight of it. The next few days were a blur of meetings, decisions, and plans, but there was something different now. Dominic wasn't as distant as he had been before. We talked more, shared moments that weren't about business. I began to see him in a new light, not just as the Mafia boss, but as a man who had made sacrifices, a man who carried a burden heavier than anyone could imagine. And I was beginning to see that I could be a part of that maybe, just maybe, I was meant to help him, not just with the empire, but with the weight of his own heart. I had never seen him like this before. Dominic Castellano, the powerful Mafia boss who had made an empire out of power and control, seemed like a completely different person. His usual cold demeanor had melted away, replaced by someone who seemed tired, burdened, and, for the first time in the months I had known him, vulnerable. We were sitting in his office again, the silence between us more than just the absence of words. There was an unspoken understanding that we had both entered into something more than business. This was personal now. He had opened up to me in ways I hadn't expected. He had allowed me to see the man behind the empire, the man who carried the weight of so many decisions, so many lives, on his shoulders. And as much as I had wanted to be strong for him, I was starting to understand that even he couldn't carry it all alone. "I can't keep doing this forever," Dominic said quietly, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the desk in front of him. There's always something new. Always someone trying to take what's mine. I watched him, his face unreadable, but there was a subtle crack in his voice that gave away his exhaustion. I thought you wanted this, I said, my voice soft, almost a whisper. He looked up at me, his expression hardening slightly, but there was a flicker of something behind his eyes. I didn't want this. I had no choice. I never had a choice. His words hung in the air, and I could feel the tension building between us. I had always known that Dominic's life was one of pressure, of constant danger, but hearing him admit it was a shock. The life he had built, the empire he controlled, came at a price. It had taken everything from him, his peace, his happiness, his ability to trust. And now, it seemed, it was taking him as well. So what do you want? I asked, finally breaking the silence. My voice was steady, but inside, I was a whirlwind of emotions. I wasn't sure what I wanted anymore, what my place in this world was, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't walk away. I couldn't go back to the life I had before. I want to stop, he said, his voice almost a whisper. I want to be able to breathe again, without looking over my shoulder, without wondering who's going to betray me next. It was then that I realized how much I had underestimated him. For all his power, for all his wealth, Dominic was a man trapped in his own creation. He had built this world with his own hands, but now it was suffocating him. I stood up and walked over to him, standing beside him as he stared out the window, his back tense, his posture rigid. I placed my hand on his shoulder, a simple gesture, but it felt like the world was shifting. For a moment, he didn't move, didn't say anything. Then, finally, he turned to me. You don't have to do this, I said, my voice low. You don't have to carry all of this on your own. His gaze softened, just for a moment, and I saw something I hadn't expected. It was as if he was finally allowing himself to feel something other than anger, something other than the weight of his empire. I don't know how to stop, he admitted, his voice breaking slightly. I don't know how to let go. Maybe you don't have to let go, I said, my heart racing as I spoke. Maybe you just need someone who can help carry the weight. Someone who will stand by you, no matter what. The words were out before I could stop them, but in that moment, I realized they were exactly what I meant. I wasn't just here to be a part of his world. I was here to be by his side, to help him through this. Dominic looked at me, his expression unreadable, but I saw something shift in his eyes. For the first time, I wasn't sure if he was seeing me as just the maid or as someone who could be a real partner, someone who could help him, not just with his empire, but with the things that really mattered. You're serious, aren't you? He asked, his voice soft. I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. I'm not going anywhere, I said, my voice steady. I'm here for you. The silence between us was thick, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It felt like something was shifting, something bigger than either of us had realized. I don't know what to say, Dominic whispered, his voice almost a rasp. I smiled, the weight of the moment settling in. You don't have to say anything, I replied softly. You just have to trust me. He didn't say anything, but his eyes told me everything. In that moment, I knew that we were no longer just two people from different worlds. We were partners, whether we were ready for it or not. And whatever came next, we would face it together. I woke up the next morning, the sunlight filtering through the curtains in Dominic's penthouse, but it didn't feel like a new day. It felt like I had entered a completely different world, and I wasn't sure if I was ready for what it would bring. Dominic and I had shared more than a few quiet moments recently. Moments where the walls between us seemed to crumble, where he let his guard down, and for a brief time, I saw the man behind the empire. But there were still so many things I didn't understand. I didn't know where I fit into his world, and I didn't know how to keep my heart from getting lost in it. The city outside the window was alive, buzzing with activity, but in here, everything was calm. Still, there was an unease that lingered in the air, an unspoken tension that neither of us had addressed. As I stood up and walked to the kitchen, I tried to push the thoughts aside, but they wouldn't leave. I didn't want to be just another part of his empire. I wanted to be something real, something more than just the woman who worked beside him. When I entered the kitchen, I found Dominic already there, his back to me as he prepared coffee. The sound of the coffee machine humming filled the room, and for a moment, I just watched him. There was something different about him today, a new kind of focus, a sharpness in his movements that hadn't been there before. He turned to face me as I stepped in, and for a moment, we just stared at each other. I could see the weight of the world in his eyes, the burden of the decisions he had to make. "You're up early," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "Couldn't sleep," I replied, my voice almost a whisper. He raised an eyebrow, his expression unreadable, but there was a flicker of something behind his gaze. "Something on your mind?" he asked, setting the coffee down and walking closer. I hesitated. I had so many questions, so many things I didn't understand. But there was one thing I needed to know. "How do you do it?" I asked, my voice steady, but there was a tremor in it that I couldn't hide. "How do you keep going, day after day, knowing everything you've built is always at risk?" Dominic's expression softened slightly, but his eyes remained guarded. "You do what you have to do," he said, his voice low. "You learn to live with the weight of it. You have no choice. If you stop, everything falls apart." I nodded, but inside, something was churning. The pressure, the constant tension. I could feel it building in me, too. It was one thing to be by his side, to share in the victories, but it was another thing entirely to live with the constant fear that it could all come crashing down at any moment. "What if you don't want to live with it anymore?" I asked before I could stop myself. The question hung in the air, and Dominic's eyes darkened slightly, though his face remained impassive. "Then you make a choice," he said quietly, his voice almost a whisper. "You either let go or you keep going. But you can't keep looking back. If you do, you'll never move forward." The words hit me harder than I expected. I had never really considered what it meant to let go of everything, to walk away from the life we had created. I had always assumed I would stand by him, no matter what. But hearing him say those words made me realize how much was at stake. "And what if I don't know if I want to keep going?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. Dominic stepped closer, his gaze never leaving mine. "Then you have to decide what matters," he said softly, his voice gentle but firm. "What are you willing to fight for? And what are you willing to lose?" The question lingered between us, and for a moment, it felt like time stood still. I thought about my life, about everything I had given up to be with Dominic. I thought about the person I was becoming and the life I was leaving behind. Was it worth it? Was this the life I wanted? "I'm not sure," I admitted, my voice barely audible. "I don't know if I'm ready for this." Dominic didn't say anything at first. He just looked at me, his expression softening. "I can't promise you it will be easy," he said quietly. "But I can promise you that you won't be alone in it. You'll never have to face it by yourself." His words were comforting, but they didn't answer the questions that were swirling in my mind. I had always been afraid of losing myself, of becoming something I wasn't. And now, I realized that I had to make a choice that would define everything that came next. "I'm here," I said, my voice steady, even if my heart wasn't. "I'll stand by you. But I need to know that we're in this together." Dominic met my gaze, his expression unreadable for a moment. Then, he nodded, his eyes softening. "We are," he said simply. And for the first time, I felt a sense of peace settle in me. Maybe I wasn't ready for everything this life would bring, but I was ready to face it, with him by my side. I had made my decision, but as I stood there in the silence that followed Dominic's words, I couldn't help but wonder what that decision truly meant. The weight of everything was starting to sink in. I had chosen to stand by his side, but what did that look like in the world he lived in? There was no turning back, and for the first time, I realized how deep I had already gone. The days that followed were a blur. Everything felt different now, like the world had shifted just slightly off its axis. Dominic was still the same powerful man I had first met, but there was something more now, something between us that neither of us had acknowledged, not fully. I could feel it every time we shared a quiet moment, every time he looked at me with that intensity, as if he were searching for something he hadn't yet found. I knew he was waiting for me to take the next step, but I wasn't sure if I was ready. I had never been in a relationship like this before. I had never been with someone who carried so much weight, someone who demanded so much of themselves, and, by extension, of me. One evening, as we were having dinner, at one of Dominic's private estates, the silence between us grew thick with unspoken words. I could tell he was thinking about something, his mind somewhere else, while I sat across from him, trying to read his expression. "You're quiet tonight," I said, breaking the silence. He looked up at me, his eyes slightly distant, but the moment he met my gaze, something shifted. "I've been thinking," he said slowly, his voice soft but serious. "About us. About this." My heart skipped a beat. I had expected him to talk about business, about the empire, but this was different. What do you mean? I asked, my voice betraying the nervousness I felt. Dominic leaned back in his chair, studying me for a moment before speaking again. I've never been good at this, he admitted, his voice low, almost vulnerable. I've always kept people at arm's length, including you. I didn't know what to say. I wasn't sure what he was expecting from me. We had shared so many quiet moments, so many talks about the future, but now it felt like the real conversation was about to happen. Why are you telling me this now? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He met my gaze, his expression softening. Because you need to know. Us, it's not just a deal. It's not just about loyalty and power. The words hung in the air between us, heavy with meaning. I've always kept people at a distance because I was afraid of what might happen if I let them in. He continued, his voice thick with emotion. But with you, I don't feel that way. And I need to understand what that means. I didn't know how to respond. The tension between us was palpable, and I could feel the weight of his words pressing down on me. So what does this mean? I asked, my heart racing. He took a deep breath, as if preparing for something monumental. It means I need you to understand what you're getting into, he said. This life, the world I live in, it's dangerous. It's complicated. I can't promise you safety or peace. I can only promise you that I'll be here, and I'll protect you. But you need to decide if you can handle that. The room felt smaller in that moment. I looked at him, really looked at him, and, for the first time, I saw the weight he carried. The life he had built, the choices he had made. All of it had led to this moment, and I had to decide whether I was ready to join him in it. I'm not afraid, I said, my voice steady, though inside, I was shaking. I'm not afraid of you, or of this world. I'm afraid of losing myself. But I know that I can't be afraid anymore. Dominic's eyes softened, and he stood up, walking over to where I sat. He knelt down in front of me, his gaze unwavering. I won't let you lose yourself, he said quietly, his voice full of determination. I won't let anything happen to you. Not while I'm still here. I felt a wave of emotion wash over me, and for the first time in a long while, I felt safe. Not because of the luxury, not because of the power, but because of him. Then we're in this together, I said, my voice firm. All the way. Dominic smiled, a rare and genuine smile that reached his eyes. Together, he echoed, before standing and holding out his hand to me. I took it without hesitation. We had crossed a line. We were no longer just two people from different worlds. We were partners. And whatever came next, I knew we would face it together. I had never felt more certain of anything in my life than I did in that moment. Dominic and I were standing side by side, no longer just caught in the whirlwind of his empire, but truly partners, connected not by the deals or the power, but by something more personal. I had made my decision, to be with him, to face the world he had created, and to carve out a space for both of us in it. The days after that conversation were filled with both tension and clarity. Dominic had made it clear that being with him meant accepting the risks, the danger, the constant pressure of his life. But I was no longer afraid. I had crossed that line, and there was no turning back. Yet, even as I felt the weight of the decision, something shifted between us. The closer we became, the more I understood what it meant to be with him. It wasn't just about loyalty or power. It was about trust. Trust that we would face everything together, no matter how dangerous or complicated it became. Dominic had warned me about the world he lived in, about the threats that loomed around every corner, but he never once asked me to step back. He had pulled me into his life, not as a bystander, but as someone who could stand beside him, fight beside him. And it was then that I realized how much he needed that. He needed someone to remind him that there was more to life than power, more than being in control. I didn't know what would come next, but I knew that whatever it was, I was ready for it. One afternoon, as we were working through the details of a particularly complicated deal, I noticed a change in Dominic. It was subtle, but it was there. He was more distant than usual, more guarded. I watched him, wondering what was going on in his mind. I had learned that when Dominic was silent, something was weighing heavily on him. Is everything okay? I asked, my voice gentle. He looked up at me, his eyes clouded, and for a brief moment, I saw a flicker of something. Fear, maybe, or regret. It's nothing, he said, his voice steady, though I could tell it was anything but. Just a bit of business to take care of. But I knew better than to let him brush it off. He had never been one to hide things from me, Not when it mattered. It's not nothing, I said, moving closer. What's going on, Dominic? He sighed and set the papers down, rubbing his forehead as if the weight of the world was suddenly too much to bear. There are people trying to take what's mine, he said, his voice tight with frustration. And they don't play by the rules. It's not just business anymore. It's personal. I stood there, processing his words, understanding the danger that surrounded him, that surrounded us. And what are you going to do? I asked, my voice calm, even though inside, my heart was racing. Dominic looked up at me, his gaze piercing. I'm going to fight, he said simply, as if it were the only option. I could see the resolve in his eyes, but I also saw the exhaustion. He was tired of the constant battles, the betrayals, the pressure. I reached out, taking his hand in mine. You don't have to fight alone, I said softly. I'm here, Dominic. I've got your back, no matter what. For a moment, he didn't respond, but then he squeezed my hand, his grip tightening. I know, he said, his voice low, filled with gratitude. I know. In that moment, I realized something profound. As much as I had once feared the world Dominic lived in, I was no longer afraid of it. I was in it, and I was ready to face whatever came our way. I was no longer just the maid, the outsider looking in. I was his partner, and we would face this world together. Days turned into weeks, and the threats against Dominic's empire grew more intense. It became clear that we weren't just dealing with rival families or business competition. There were people who wanted to tear down everything he had built, people who didn't care who they hurt in the process. But through it all, Dominic remained steadfast, never wavering in his commitment to protect what mattered most, his empire, and now me. I had become a part of his world in ways I hadn't imagined, and as much as I had once feared it, I realized it was the only world I wanted. The danger, the power, the unpredictability, it was all part of what made Dominic who he was. And I couldn't imagine standing anywhere else. One evening, after another tense meeting, Dominic and I stood together on the balcony of his penthouse, looking out over the city. The skyline stretched before us, the lights of New York twinkling like stars. We're in this together, he said, his voice steady but full of conviction. I nodded, my heart swelling with certainty. Always, I replied. And in that moment, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, we would face them, together. I had thought that after everything Dominic and I had been through, the worst was behind us. But I was wrong. The weight of the empire, the decisions, and the constant threats never really eased. In fact, the closer we grew, the more the dangers seemed to surround us, pushing in from all sides. One afternoon, as I sat in the penthouse, going over the plans for an upcoming event with his assistant, I felt it again, that unsettling tension in the air, the feeling that something was about to happen. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. I tried to ignore it, focusing on the task at hand, but the unease never left me. Dominic walked in just as I was about to comment on the guest list. His usual confident demeanor was gone, replaced by a look of intense focus. He closed the door behind him and leaned against it, his eyes scanning the room. What's wrong? I asked, looking up at him. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked over to the window, his gaze drifting out over the city, as if he were trying to make sense of something. There's a shift happening, he said finally, his voice low, almost grim. I've been getting word from my sources. Someone's making moves. I stood up, feeling the weight of his words settle in. Who? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He looked at me, his eyes cold. It's not just one person. It's a group. They're trying to break into my territory, trying to push me out. And it's not just business. They're making it personal. The realization hit me like a punch to the stomach. The dangers he had warned me about, the ones I had always thought were part of his world, were now closing in on us. What do we do? I asked, my voice steady, though my heart was racing. Dominic didn't hesitate. We fight back, he said, his tone unwavering. We show them that they've made a mistake. It was a simple response, but there was a finality to it that sent a shiver down my spine. I won't let them take what's mine, he added, his voice dark and determined. I knew that this was the world I had chosen to be a part of, a world where power was everything, and there were no second chances. But even as I stood there with him, feeling the weight of the decision, I realized something else. This wasn't just his fight anymore. It was ours. Dominic had shown me a world of luxury and power, but now he was showing me the darkness that came with it, and I was ready to face it with him. We'll handle it together, I said, stepping closer to him. He looked at me, his expression softening for a brief moment before he nodded. Together, he echoed. The next few days were a blur of activity. Dominic's security team worked around the clock, tracking down leads, making moves, and setting up defenses. But it wasn't just the physical threats that we had to worry about. There were whispers in the air, rumors spreading, people trying to figure out where the cracks in his empire were. And through it all, I stood by his side, learning more than I had ever expected about this dangerous world he lived in. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't comfortable. But every time the pressure mounted, Dominic and I grew closer. We shared moments of quiet together, moments where the rest of the world seemed to fade away. It was in those moments that I realized that no matter what happened, no matter how dangerous things got, we were in this together. The fight was just beginning, but as I looked at Dominic, I knew one thing for sure: we wouldn't back down. Not now, not ever. The days blurred together as the tension between Dominic and his enemies reached a boiling point. The power plays, the betrayal, the shifting alliances, it was all coming to a head. I could see it in his eyes, the familiar coldness that returned whenever he faced a threat. The walls he had once let down around me now closed again, and I knew it wasn't just his empire at risk anymore. It was us. The night before the final confrontation, I found myself standing in the large, dimly lit living room of Dominic's penthouse. The city lights outside flickered like stars, distant and cold. Dominic stood by the window, his back to me, looking out at the vast expanse of the city he controlled. "You're thinking about the past again, aren't you?" I asked softly, breaking the silence. He didn't turn around, but I could feel the weight of his thoughts. "I've built this life from nothing," he said, his voice low, filled with the same power I had come to expect. "But nothing lasts forever, and I've always known that." I walked over to him, standing by his side, close enough to feel the intensity of his presence, but far enough to give him space. "It doesn't have to end, Dominic. Not like this," I said, my voice steady despite the storm that was building inside of me. "We're in this together, and we'll get through it." He turned to face me then, his eyes searching mine as if he were trying to read every thought, every doubt I had. "You've seen what this life is, Sarah. You've seen the dangers. I won't drag you into this if you're not ready." His words struck me harder than I expected. I had known the risks when I decided to stand by his side, but hearing him voice them made it all feel real in a way it hadn't before. "I'm ready," I said, my voice unwavering. "I've been ready. I'm not leaving you now." Dominic studied me for a long moment before he nodded slowly, as if making a decision in his own mind. "You never back down, do you?" he asked with a small smile, though the tension in his face didn't soften. "No," I replied firmly. "I never back down." The night was heavy with anticipation. We both knew what was coming. It was no longer just about business. It was personal. The people who were trying to destroy everything Dominic had built were coming for him, for us, and we had to be ready. The meeting had been set, the cards were on the table, and now it was just a matter of waiting for the storm to hit. As we prepared for the final confrontation, I could feel Dominic's focus shifting, his mind a million miles away. The Mafia world was unforgiving, and I knew that whatever happened next would change everything. But I also knew one thing: we were in this together. The door to the penthouse opened with a soft creak, and Dominic's bodyguards entered, their faces grim. It was time. "You ready?" I asked him, standing beside him now, our arms brushing briefly. He looked at me, his expression serious but not without a flicker of something else, something I hadn't seen in him before. Vulnerability, maybe. Trust. "I am," he said, his voice steady. He wasn't just the Mafia boss now. He was the man I had come to care for, the man I had promised to stand by. And in that moment, I knew we were more than just allies. We were partners, bound by more than just power or loyalty. We were bound by something stronger. The fight was waiting outside. The empire Dominic had built, the world he had created, was about to be tested. But we would face it together. No more fear, no more doubt. Whatever came next, we would face it side by side. As we walked out into the night, ready for whatever was waiting for us, I felt a surge of strength I hadn't known I had. This was no longer about just surviving. It was about winning. And we would win, together. Experience the intense and captivating world of power, betrayal, and love in this unforgettable romance. As a maid caught in the whirlwind of a dangerous Mafia empire, Sarah's life takes a dramatic turn when she crosses paths with Dominic Castellano, a powerful mafia boss. What begins as an unexpected encounter soon blossoms into an intense romance that challenges the boundaries of loyalty and trust. This story follows Sarah's journey from being an unnoticed maid to standing beside Dominic, navigating a world full of danger, high stakes, and unspoken emotions. In these romance stories, true strength emerges from vulnerability, and love is tested in the most unexpected ways. As Sarah and Dominic face betrayal and danger, their bond deepens, and they must decide if their love is strong enough to survive the ruthless world they live in. Full of twists, passion, and raw emotion, this tale explores the complexities of love and loyalty in the world of power. These romance stories will captivate your heart as Sarah and Dominic learn to face their fears and fight for the love that binds them. With every choice, every challenge, they inch closer to realizing that their love is stronger than any danger that threatens to tear them apart. For those who crave a good story full of deep connection and unforgettable romance, these tales are a must-read. Dive into the world of Sarah and Dominic, where power and passion collide, and discover why these romance stories are unlike anything you've ever read before.